get started. So again, welcome to the role of advocacy in community forestry. This is part 3 of our 2016 webinar series. We've got 2 speakers here today with us that have graciously given their time and effort to put together a presentation that everybody will enjoy today to give everybody some insight in how to advocate and how to promote urban forestry in their community or within their state. So the 2 speakers we have, we've got Chuck Mills with California ReLeaf. He's been a part of California ReLeaf for over 20 years. He was a founding board member of the organization when it incorporated as a nonprofit back in 2004. He served on the board of directors from January 2005 through 2010, where he served as the treasurer and president in various other capacities. He brings 27 years of experience in natural resource conservation to the organization and currently oversees California ReLeaf's support of local urban forestry projects and public policy efforts. Prior to joining California ReLeaf staff in August 2010, he spent 3.5 years with the California Council of Land Trusts and 12 years with the Trust for Public Land in program management and advocacy. So he's got lots of experience and will hopefully bring valuable information to everybody. Our second presenter is Shannon Ramsay with Trees Forever. She's the founder of that organization, which she started as a volunteer back in 1989. She believes volunteers are the lifeblood of any community forestry program, and today Trees Forever engages an average of 7,000 volunteers each year. Working with communities of all sizes across Iowa, Illinois, and nationally, Trees Forever assists tree boards, other nonprofits, and individuals with advocacy, technical assistance, and funding. Shannon served as the chair of the Alliance for Community Trees and is currently on the Forest Service Resource Advisory Council. So we've got a very big brain power here with us today. And with that, I will hand over the reins to Shannon and Chuck.
Well, good morning, everyone. Honored to be with you today. This is Shannon. Chuck, introduce yourself.
And this is Chuck at California ReLeaf. It is great to be here, and especially sharing the podium virtually with Shannon and Trees Forever. They're a great organization.
Thanks, Chuck. Well, likewise, Chuck is kind of the rock star of advocacy in California, and they have the dollars to prove it. So excited to be with you all. And first I want to start with an overview, and we'll check out how everything's going here, moving the slides forward. We've already gone over that. The overview today, just to give you a sense of what we're going to do, we're going to look at the goals first and then go into advocacy guidelines. And that section, of course, is about just the things you need to know. More often, people know just enough to be afraid, so we want to be sure everyone's getting more comfortable with advocacy. And then the second one, forming coalitions. We're going to spend quite a lot of time on that, and we want you guys to know that all of the things we bring up will apply to the smallest community, to a city, and to an entire state or national. Inspiring action, well, that is certainly our hope, and we're going to talk about how we can inspire you guys and how we hope you can inspire others. And then we'll have a Q&A period. Our hope is to have, 15, 20 minutes to do questions and answers. The goal today, we want to get you guys very comfortable and empower you to advocate for and educate others on the value of trees in our community forest. We want you to think broadly about advocacy, because advocacy, today we're talking primarily about advocacy with, from more of a political standpoint, with elected officials. But, that can also mean something as simple as advocating for trees in your neighborhood, educating your neighbor about the importance of a large tree they may have. And that's how you practice educating your neighbors. I'm sure you guys already do that. Well, let's get started with general advocacy guidelines. Individual citizens may lobby. Absolutely. No restrictions on anyone to get out and be an advocate. Now, Chuck's going to get more into why we use the word lobby and why we use the word advocacy. Government employees may lobby as citizens on their days off. Generally, government employees are prohibited from lobbying, and that's become more restrictive just because, you know, of all the ethical standards involved. But we have many government folks taking a day off to be advocates when we have events. Now, if you officially ask and request the presence of a government official for technical advice or information, that's a different thing. So keep that in mind. They may come if they're invited to provide presentations or information. Tree board members may advocate and lobby as individuals or private employees of companies. Professional paid lobbyists, they have to register, and that's a whole different ball of wax when you're a paid lobbyist. You have to register and you have to list who you are lobbying for. And then there are directories provided for that, and there's also a federal reporting form. Moving on. The federal rules are that 501c3 nonprofits, they can't do a substantial part of their activities as lobbying. Otherwise, they have to go to another classification. They can remain a nonprofit, but it's a different classification, and your tax-exempt status changes. And I know many of you may be on tree boards and not necessarily nonprofits. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but the general rule of thumb is that you can't spend over 20% of your budget on lobbying. And for many of us, I mean, that should empower you to feel more comfortable with federal guidelines, that you certainly can do a lot of advocacy work. And this next slide, and just so you know, Chuck loves clip art, and he really likes clip art that's animated, and I love this one, so go for it. Organizations may, however, involve themselves in issues of public policy without the activity being considered as lobbying. For example, organizations may conduct educational meetings, prepare and distribute educational materials, or otherwise consider public policy issues in an educational manner without jeopardizing their tax-exempt status. So the way Trees Forever does it, let's just say we are at the Capitol, which, by the way, we have our Iowa Capitol Day tomorrow, so this is all very fresh on my mind today. The only time that we will actually officially count our hours as lobbying is when we are making a formal request and a dollar amount. Otherwise, it's all going to go down as education about all the different activities and programs we're involved with and our partners, Well, Chuck, I think Chuck's going to take over from here, and we're going to stop a little further in and see if you guys have questions on specific guidelines. Okay, this is the start of the Chuck and Shannon show. Turning it over to you, Chuck.
Thanks so much, Shannon. And Shannon brings up some really excellent points that I think are important to note as we move forward, especially as we're distinguishing between lobbying and advocacy. And what I'm going to do is go through a dramatization or a sample of what a typical advocacy encounter could be when you're meeting with a decision maker for the first time, typically referred to as meet and greets within the political realm. And again, these can go one of two ways. You can be advocating, as Shannon mentioned, where you're just educating the individual or the decision maker, or if you have a specific ask, Shannon referenced funding, which of course is important to all of us, then you can incorporate that in, and then that counts more toward lobbying. So just a couple of ground rules before I get into this sample of what a typical meet and greet could be, which is the first time you're really introducing yourself, your organization, to a decision maker, either at the state, federal, local level. What I chose to do was focus on North Carolina, which I know very little about the politics of North Carolina, and that was intentional. First, our host is the North Carolina Urban Forest Council. And second, I wanted to get a sense of, with a very limited time and materials, what could I, as an advocate, put together going solely off of what's available to me at a couple of websites where preferably I'd be able to get the information I needed. So I set some goals and objectives for myself, something that I think we can all relate to. If I'm going to be doing an introduction to a decision maker at the state level, ultimately what my goal may be there is for me to find a way to increase state funding for urban forestry. In order to do that, I'm going to need to find a legislative champion to support this effort, which is why I'm doing these meet and greets, to get a sense of who could be our champion. And then a critical component of this is going to be, to build that champion, I'm going to want to connect my issue to their issue and to other existing funding sources so that we can have a smooth transition into a conversation when that time occurs about how they are our champion for an ask on funding. So in the case of North Carolina, I was able to identify via the web a water management fund that seemed like it could be an appropriate fit for urban forestry. So those were my ground rules for myself. So the first thing I did, and the first step, and I think an appropriate meet and greet is you got to do a little homework. And I went to the North Carolina General Assembly website, and I picked the first Democrat that came up. And this was the Representative Gail Adcock. And within her profile, I picked out the things that I thought immediately could help me connect to urban forestry in preparation for my meeting with her. One, you can see her picture right away. She's connected to health. When you read a little further in the website, you'll see that she's actually a nurse practitioner. That's going to work to our favor if we're talking about connecting health to urban forestry, which is obviously a big issue. Looking again at the General Assembly website, she sits on a couple of committees that could be appropriate to us, and so that works in our favor. And she's the author of a district bill that connects fees to parks, so again, something else that we can try to draw on common ground. So we cut a break in some areas here is that this representative we're going to be meeting with, we can draw some commonalities with her as we move forward. One of the things that's not on there is a biography, so we don't know much about her beyond that, and I intentionally didn't go looking for that so that we could still focus in on what we can accomplish with limited resources. So we don't have a bio on her, but we've got some things that we can immediately connect to as we move forward. So just doing even a little bit of homework is really going to help in terms of making that introduction. Next, I wanted to take a look at, who could we bring from her district? Representatives, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level, they're hearing from paid lobbyists all the time that are often right within the city where that action is occurring. So in this case, it would be Raleigh. And I wanted to take a look at her district and see who's a constituent that I could bring to this meeting so that she can feel that personal connection to our issue and feel like she's not just listening to a paid lobbyist, but that she's actually listening to her constituency as well. Now, she lives in Cary, North Carolina, and I'm sure there's local government representatives and others there that might be able to help. But I dug a little deeper into her district, Wake County, and found this small little community called New Hill, and a group that, seems like their mission is connected to what we might be able to bring to the table as we, again, try to find symmetry between what we're trying to do for urban forestry and what she's trying to accomplish in the General Assembly. So bringing someone from the district, a constituent, to where he or she can feel a connection, I think is really important. Geography can play a factor here. This is a place that's only about a half hour from Raleigh. So if the board president for New Hill Country Living or Community Association can drive to Raleigh, that's great. It's only about a half hour, and that's going to make for hopefully a more enhanced and enriched visit for the member herself. Number 3, talked about this a little bit, we want to find some common ground. So again, looking at her site and then also looking at the North Carolina Urban Forestry Council website, what are some things that we can have as conversation starters? And what is advocacy, but it's in a very educational frame. What we're doing is we're trying to introduce her to the North Carolina Urban Forest Council, what that council is about, and how we can be a resource to her. So, we can talk about her district bill on park fees legislation. See where she might want to go with that in the future. This is something that it has plans to pursue statewide or countywide at some point. Of course, I established that she's a nurse practitioner, so spend a little time talking about trees and the positive health facts, whether that's reduced asthma rates or reduced child obesity, things that we think is going to really resonate with her as a nurse practitioner. I mentioned we know from the website that she lives in Cary. Cary Greenways and Trails seems to be a very popular destination within Cary. It's managed by the Public Parks Department, and it's a series of greenways and trails where I think we can demonstrate the value of urban forestry and active transportation and improve quality of life in the city where she lives. And then going back to the North Carolina Urban Forest Council website, they actually put their money where their mouth is in terms of trying to improve urban forestry in the state by administering a Legacy Tree Fund grant. And they've done a few of these awards over the last several years. I'm suggesting that if you have an opportunity to talk about how you're furthering the role of urban forestry by getting dollars and resources out there, California ReLeaf does this as well, that's something that can connect to the member as well. And if you have the opportunity, if you're in Raleigh, take her on a visit. There was an award in 2014 where trees were planted. Let her see what's going on with these dollars being administered to improve urban forestry. One thing that a friend of mine from Pacific Forest Trust taught me that I like to keep in mind is, he calls it the 3-3-3 rule, and I don't know if he was the initiator of this or not, but I like it nonetheless, is you're going to want to leave behind some materials. You're going to probably have anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes with a member, but you're going to want to leave behind some materials that talk about your organization and give the member a sense of what you're doing and how you do it. So whatever you're doing, the materials that you're leaving behind, there may be a propensity to leave a really large report around about connecting trees to air quality or, maybe your annual report. There's a possibility they'll thumb through these materials, but if it's not something that they can immediately grasp and digest within a couple of minutes, there's a possibility that it will just go sit on a shelf. And so what I'm suggesting is, be strategic in your leave behind materials. Give them a couple of one-pagers where they can glance it and say, okay, I understand this is about the North Carolina Urban Forest Council. Give it another 30 seconds to say, all right, this is what the organization does, and then if they can read the whole thing in 3 minutes or less, that's even better. So an important rule to remember when you're thinking about what you're leaving behind material-wise. So here's a couple of examples that follow up from that, and then one of the documents that Leslie uploaded is an example that we've used in California regarding the Bay Area and greenhouse gases, which we'll actually talk more about later. This document on the left from the North Carolina Urban Forest Council, this document actually doesn't exist. I put this together using solely the resources that were available on the website. Some great images, talks about the work they do. I think there's about one sentence of original text in here. Everything else was pulled directly from the website. And you can see that, for the 20, 25 minutes that I maybe spent on this, going through the website and picking out the best components that we could leave behind, this does actually a pretty good job of talking about what the Urban Forest Council does, some of the expertise that it brings to the table, and some of the major issues that it addresses. And then the other document also came off the website. It was about a 34-page report from the EPA on stormwater. I went through there, I found a page, I did some retitling up at the top, and I pulled that page out because ultimately what we're thinking about is how this member could serve as a champion for us to get money that connects trees back to this water management fund in North Carolina. So we're going to want to demonstrate the roles of trees in stormwater management. And this one pager from the EPA does a pretty good job of capturing it. So this was another important piece that we wanted to connect and leave with her. And then finally, as Shannon referenced, you can engage in some lobbying, even nonprofits. I'm a nonprofit organization. I am not a registered lobbyist. In California, I need to spend a third of my time being in direct meetings with legislative staff, administration, or members. I spend about 10% of my time doing that. So we're well below the federal standard. We're well below the 20% budget that Shannon referenced. So the reason that I bring this up is that everything that I talked about in that hypothetical meet and greet, there's not a single thing in that discussion that's lobbying. We're talking about how we're educating the member. We want to position them so that when we're done with that visit, in a couple weeks or when the session's really starting to kick into gear, we can come back and say, you know, were you able to look at these materials? We want to talk to you about how we connect urban forestry to this water management fund that's in North Carolina. That's when you transition over from advocacy to lobbying. So as we reference here, just don't overdo it. And, you know, you should be comfortable with how you can connect to your decision maker, whether that's the state, local, or federal level. And I think it's back to Shannon.
Well, good morning again. Thanks, Chuck. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Now's the time to start typing a few questions if you have any on the guidelines. Or, you know, if you're still concerned or want more clarification. As Chuck said, he's trying to just lay out all those examples of connecting with many different groups and talking about goals. And I thought the representative for North Carolina that you had on, Chuck, boy, she just looks like a great collaborator to me. I bet she's a tree hugger.
She may very well be.
Anyway, you know, just talking with her about the value of trees and all the things going on at the tree board level, at the city and state level, it's all of it is just simply educating her. No lobbying involved. Any questions coming up, Leslie?
I don't see any. I guess one question I've got, not necessarily pertaining specifically to lobbying or advocacy, but when you go to visit your representative or your city council or your mayor, is it best to come as a group or like individually or kind of like what size? I just didn't know. I figure people would want to know like how to not be too overwhelming but have a presence.
Well, I think personally it's always best to take someone that's influential with the mayor, that knows the mayor well, that for some reason, you know, the mayor will take seriously. And you'd like to think that they take all constituents seriously and equally. That's not always true. So if you know someone that's been a campaign contributor or just, you know, has other things going on in the community they highly respect, you know, take a board member. I think taking a group of 3 or 4 is fine. You know, I think once you get over that, if you're going to have an individual meeting, that gets a little more difficult. It depends on the personality of the mayor, the city manager you're visiting with. Sometimes they just, you know, they want to get right to the chase. What exactly do you want? And making clear to them, you know, that you're there to let them know that you want to see more investment in trees in the community, and it's good to have some real specific things to talk about with them.
Okay. I did get one question from our attendee, Beth. She asked, is it better to make a formal appointment or to try and speak for a few minutes after a local meeting?
I prefer a formal appointment myself. Chuck?
Yeah, I agree. And first, I agree with everything that Shannon said previously about keeping the crowd small, and especially when you're in those early efforts to develop a relationship and some trust with a member. I think that's probably really important. But yeah, when it comes to meeting with a decision maker, they often have very full calendars, and if you do manage to get an appointment, even then, you know, you're probably going to get anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes, at least in those initial stages. And so it could just be very disappointing if you tried to approach someone afterwards or do a drop-in and you've got a constituent with you and they're just not available.
Another pointer for you guys is when you get there, be sure that you have, you know, at least talked a little bit ahead about who's going to say what. You don't want to get into a meeting with an influential person and launch into a whole bunch of stuff about technical issues around trees necessarily. You want to, you know, be sure they have some things they're comfortable talking about and probably open the meeting for you.
Yeah, again, I would agree with Shannon on that. The other thing I would add is that if you can share your success story rather than your sorrow story, I think that helps open the door. I think, you know, members, again, they're approached with a lot of different issues over the course of any given day or week, and, you know, for them to be able to have a moment to talk to someone about the positive things that they're doing in the world of urban and community forestry could be very uplifting. That could really resonate with them, as opposed to coming in and immediately getting into, you know, all of our trees are dying, and you know, in California we have a drought, there's no money, et cetera. I think that as an initial opener isn't as strong as trying to really frame your success story with them.
I know I recently heard from the mayor of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Very influential mayor, used to be Speaker of the House, and his 15-year-old son had talked with him about how concerned he was about street trees and the neighborhoods losing trees. And he told that story when he was speaking one day, you know. So you never know what you're going to find out there as far as what they've been thinking about. Getting an appointment set, you know, they're tuning in. They know you're coming in. They're going to be thinking about it and setting the stage there. Which, coming out with our next slide, we're going to move into just talking about group work and coalition building, and that everything revolves around that passion for trees, you know, and the natural world. Obviously, Chuck and I are on with you guys today, and we're all here. You're all here because we care deeply, and many of us spend a good deal of our time working for trees and forestry. So finding a volunteer, I think before ability to speak, all those things, it's got to be dedication and passion. Coalition building, finding the right rallying point, and just talking about a couple things that we used. In Iowa, we have used emerald ash borer because it kind of moved through Illinois, and it's marching around the Midwest, and of course many other parts of the country. But since it was just getting in, we decided the last couple of years that was the horse we would ride in on. Now in California, California ReLeaf Coalition, that group, they have definitely seen, they saw the opportunity for trees to be part of greenhouse gas reductions and trading in California. And because they also have, of course, one of our most highly regarded researchers there, Dr. Greg McPherson, who did early research on trees and carbon sequestration in cities. You know, they were really well positioned to work on that. And like I said earlier, it has paid off big time for California. Demystifying the whole group process, you know, we're all part of group efforts. And, you know, whether it's a committee you're on at church, whether you're the Parent Teachers Association or the Garden Club, any group effort. I mean, that's all it is. It's simply a group effort to build a coalition. And we're going to get more into that. At the local level, just talking about your coalition, and we already covered some of this, talking about going to see the mayor. I prefer to really think about the whole city council, and it can take a lot of individual work, but planning and care events with the mayor speaking or a council member speaking, that is so important. We find that you can't get mayors out unless they have a speaking role. They really have to have a speaking role. And be sure you let them know that they're on the agenda, and try to send them an agenda, even if it's just in an email ahead, or give them a call. Invitations to other council members is important. Trying to give them a role as well, whether it's, you know, inviting them to help put soil into first ceremonial tree being planted, or maybe they know enough to be a team leader at a planting. It's also good to work in partnership with your city departments and be sure they see you as a partner. And, that varies a lot personality-wise. Some city staff are much more comfortable partnering than others. But I think we've seen that change so much in the last 10 years with how city staff and state forestry staff see the nonprofits and tree boards as, just a critical partner. The other thing is meeting with your local editorial board with your newspaper. If it's a daily newspaper, that's certainly important to get to know your editorial board. These days things change all the time with reporters. So just being sure that, you give them the sense that you're there to answer questions and that there's more than just you involved, that there's a group of folks, giving them a sense of how important the issue of community trees are to you and your local group. A couple things I wanted to mention. Chuck's already covered some of this, so we won't go into this in great detail, but just finding things that are relevant to your community. So if you, like Chuck said, if you know there's been a lot of interest in biking or public health issues, we have spent a lot of time working with our partners, especially in Sacramento and and elsewhere around the country on trees and public health. And there's so much out there available in the way of research with wonderful researchers like Dr. Bill Sullivan or Kathy Wolf. And a lot of this has been funded by the Forest Service. And there's so many ways to tie trees and public health in now. So that may be one of the, say, 3 points you want to bring up. The other one that we've done a lot of work on is pollinators, because pollinators, right now, monarch butterflies is our charismatic pollinator. And people are so worried about bees, monarchs. But how many people know that trees are a huge support system for pollinators? Dr. Doug Tallamy from the University of Delaware has done a lot of the research on trees and pollinators. And, I think about North Carolina and the fabulous oaks you guys have, whether coastal or inland, fabulous trees supporting so many species. As you can see here on this slide, one oak can support over 500 species of butterflies, moths, etc. So this is news, and then this is also how you get Audubon or a local birding group involved in the world of urban community forestry. We like to use the phrase meadow in the sky. Trees are a meadow in the sky. And you start thinking about these fabulous large city trees and start observing in the spring as the blossoms come out just how many bees and insects are eating. Trees are the first food generally for insects because they bloom the earliest. So bringing that in, this brings up another whole group that you can invite into the coalition, the folks that are involved in monarch rescue and those kinds of things. Now we're going to start talking about state coalition building, and how are we doing on time here? Let's see. Chuck, you ready to take over?
I think so, yeah, and I can go through this fairly quick. So thank you for that presentation, Shannon. I think all those elements can just kind of cross in both local, regional, state, federal. As Shannon referenced, I'm going to walk you through a case study where we did have some success in California, and hopefully we'll continue to have some success. We were very fortunate that our state is really trying to take a leadership role on reducing greenhouse gases, and we have a commitment to do so by 2020 and then again in 2030 and 2050. And one of the byproducts of a legislative measure that mandates these cuts was a funding source that has to be used to reduce greenhouse gases. And like other states, California has had its budget woes. The current governor has taken us out of those to a certain extent, but we're still tight on general fund allocations, and especially for natural resources, those dollars are hard to come by. So when this funding source was coming online in 2013, there were literally dozens of hands out from stakeholders and special interests from across California wanting to get a piece of this action. And we knew from what was coming out of the administration that out of these 100+ hands, there were going to be maybe a dozen that got something out of it. So how do we, as a small interest, rise above that clamoring and really make an impact? And the way that we chose to approach this was coalition building. So we had a clear objective before the 2014 legislative session started. In October, we realized we wanted to get specific. We wanted to get some of these dollars for CAL FIRE's Urban and Community Forestry, and CAL FIRE is short for California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, which runs our Urban and Community Forestry program at the state. So how did we go about this? Well, the first thing, and I think Shannon nailed this, and I couldn't agree more, is it has to start with a local voice. And we're really fortunate that in California we have about 80, 85 nonprofit local urban forestry organizations, some of which may be familiar to you that you see up here. Sacramento Tree Foundation certainly has some notoriety and has been a great partner with others. Amigos de los Rios as well. So we're very fortunate to already have at our disposal a network of local voices throughout California that we were going to be able to use to connect to the issue when we're talking with legislators about how we could possibly get in on some of these funds that were coming forward to reduce greenhouse gases. Now, once we have that local voice, one of the things that we did is one of our two main visuals, which got a lot of traction, was connecting that local voice to a California map and showing legislators where in their district or near their district these organizations were going to be operating, these groups that if we got funding for urban forestry, where we'd be seeing trees and related vegetation and other urban forestry activities happen in California. And this really resonated. And so I would say that to the extent possible, as you're moving forward in something like this, if you can have a map or a couple good visuals, that really helps. So the next thing we did is, we looked at what are some of our most natural partners. Well, I think as many of you know on the phone, Nature Conservancy has been involved in green infrastructure and urban forestry for a bit of time now. They were a natural partner where we have a good working relationship. Pacific Forest Trust, also, urban forestry as a subset of forests, they were interested. A couple other groups in California that were direct natural partners where we had relationships, start talking to them about, should we be working together on this issue? Isn't our goal all to try to get funding for natural resources from this funding source? And there was agreement there. And so we started with this local, or with these logical state partners, and then move forward from there. And there we go. Then we used those traditional partnerships to start building non-traditional partnerships. And one of the things that really worked to our advantage here is that one of the organizations that kind of bridges that gap between conservationism and environmentalism is the Planning and Conservation League. And that's one of the things that we did was talk to them and say, how can you connect this to other groups that we know have interest here that we think could have a positive role in working to connect urban forestry to some other issues. In this particular case, we were talking about environmental justice. So these groups, Coalition for Clean Air and the others, they're very much engaged in environmental justice. They help spearhead some environmental justice legislation in California that connected back to this issue of reducing greenhouse gases. And Planning and Conservation League allowed for that entree. And once we met with Coalition Clean Air, then we started branching even further. So after we've done some outreach to the traditional partners, the local partners, and we built some statewide partnerships, and now we have a statewide voice. Now we have 18, 19 groups at the statewide level, plus another 40 or 50 at the local level, that are all saying the same thing regarding urban forestry, is that, this is going to reduce greenhouse gases, this is a good use of funds, it's going to meet the goals and mandates of what's been put in statute in the state of California. But even then, we need to do more. And this was one of the things that was really valuable to us that I strongly encourage, and I'm going to highlight it here, is we looked at message delivery from non-traditional voices. 3 or 4 years ago, I really didn't know much about this group, Safe Routes to Schools, but I had the opportunity to work with them on an issue in 2012 where we found real collaboration and realized that we have a lot in common. They're very much interested in active transportation, reducing vehicle miles, and as you can see from this picture, making sure there's plenty of green spaces for kids that are going to school to be able to get there safely, have a good quality of life, and be able to enjoy that active transportation to their school. So we said, let's start working with each other, and we attended each other's conferences. We got into message delivery for Safe Routes to Schools, and I think that's one of the big things that I've heard from folks over the past couple of years is that right here, we really reciprocated. We didn't just use them as a resource, they used us as a resource as well, and we continue that today. So that's a really valuable lesson. Finally, going back to visuals, the idea of trying to get into the technicalities of what is carbon sequestration, how do trees really sequester carbon, how is this relating to greenhouse gas reductions. Very technical. A lot of staffers and legislative members that you meet with probably aren't going to be experts on urban forestry and the science behind carbon capture. So we needed to come up with a real tangible, dynamic visual that would let folks know exactly what we're talking about. And as Shannon said, we're really fortunate to have Dr. Greg McPherson only about 20 miles from where we're located, and he worked with me to identify what he thought was the total amount of carbon being sequestered by California's 200 million urban trees, and as luck would have it, on an annual basis, it's nearly identical to the amount of GHGs being emitted annually by the largest refinery in California, which is located in Richmond. And everyone knows about this refinery. It's a very familiar landmark as you're going into the Bay Area. And so we were able to show what we're doing in urban forestry is exactly offsetting what's being emitted out of the Bay Area from this one refinery. That was a very striking, powerful visual that really resonated. So combine all that. Moving forward over the course of the months, we've got our coalition, we've got our talking points, we have some fact sheets, we have some visuals, we have non-traditional voices supporting us in the realm of urban forestry and sustainable community strategies and other natural resources. We were pretty happy with the outcome. When June rolled around and our budget was signed a couple days before July, we were able to capture a little less than $18 million for the program, and it was the largest one-year single-state allocation for urban forestry in U.S. history. So we're really pleased with what's been happening there, and we want to make sure that we're continuing that success. And so this year, we're looking at $30 million that's been proposed for the urban and community forestry program, and another $20 million for a new program that relates to green infrastructure. So over the course of the years, as you can see, we've started building on that success. More people want to be part of this very successful story in California about connecting urban forestry to disadvantaged communities, reducing greenhouse gases, improving air and water quality, and doing so with a funding source that has to be used for these purposes. So, over time, additional federal groups like Natural Resources Defense Council have come on, a lot of other statewide groups that are either in the energy sector or in the private industry. I believe Arbor Pro is right there, have come on to where now we've got 107 groups talking about the value of urban forestry in California as we look to try to secure about $30 million in the next couple of months. So that's a statewide success story, and I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon now to talk about some coalition building at the local level as well. And I just shot past it.
Hello again. Thank you, Chuck. Well, you guys have just heard like the most amazing story in the whole country right now. The California budget is approaching the federal budget for urban forestry, which, by the way, I would like to see us all do more on that. So don't forget to talk with your federal elected officials about the importance of the urban forestry budget in Congress. The California story, as I've told Chuck, it's a little intimidating. You know, I can't talk too much about Iowa here in the Midwest because, about California here in the Midwest. I have to give folks here, closer examples sometimes. But interestingly enough, Iowa has been pretty tuned into carbon sequestration and energy efficiency with trees. So you never know who might be receptive. Here, the photo you're looking at, here we are at the Iowa Capitol, and this is the coalition that's gathered. And the coalition we put together, by the way, you have a fact sheet that's available to you in the documents that I'm going to share with you. That is the fact sheet we use for Capitol Day. It's a quick glance, and it probably can meet Chuck's test. You can, the threes. You can glance at it. You can see all the members on it, and you can quickly, if you're interested more in rural forestry and you have a tree farm, you want to do some harvesting, you're interested in the industry part of it, there's a section on that. If you're more interested in urban community, there's a section on that. And you can find some of the tips and dollar amounts and just some of the things that we think legislators are going to find interesting. What is Emerald Ash Borer going to cost? And also how much is being generated just in the economy every year through wood products and the nursery industry. Our outcome in Iowa, we have achieved the 500,000 earmark for the last 3 years for forest health. We started with zero. The first year we got it up to 100,000, and then we were successful moving it on up, and so for the last 3 years, like I said, we've had it at 500. And by the way, now's a good time for you guys to start writing questions if you have some. But feel free to take our fact sheet. It's in a Word format. It's pretty simple. And use it as a format for something you guys might want to put together at a local level or statewide. I think Iowa is a little bit more like South Carolina, North Carolina, in that you've got a lot of rural areas, a lot of small communities, a couple of larger cities, and you're going to need to bring in probably your state forester, your woodland owners groups, as we have done, to do something at a state level, because it all matters. And frankly, what I've found, is that many of the woodland owners are the ones that are also helping small communities with their trees. They may become tree keepers, certified volunteer caregivers for trees. And that's just kind of a quick overview on statewide coalition building, and at this point, we're ready to hear from you guys, take questions, and let us know if you have a preference on who will take questions.
Okay. Yes, so if you have a question, just post it in the Q&A tab at the top left, and I'll read it and allow Chuck and Shannon a minute or two to respond. And it's also one thing I wanted to mention is if you guys, as attendees, have specific examples of successes that you've had in your community or your state level, I can unmute your line and you can mention that to the rest of the group, because I think that's something that's important to share as well. So type your questions and I'll read them out. And then, so we've got one that came in. It says, looking at Iowa examples, are the coalition members state employees or not? And if our state versions of the groups you listed are actual state employees, can they participate?
This is Shannon. Actually, no. The coalition members are not state agencies. They are precluded from serving, or joining. However, we involve them in many ways. We request that they show up and do an exhibit, and tomorrow they'll be doing an Emerald Ash Borer exhibit. We involve both the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Natural Resources and those kinds of things. We requested that our state forester be there to answer questions and to make comments. You can go to the Trees Forever website, just treesforever.org/advocacy, and look at our, just how we position the day. But generally, the your coalition members, it just varies. Now, in California, you could see there were some association groups like the Planning and Conservation Alliance. California ReLeaf has several employees. These are groups that have some staff. And so in Iowa, we have the Iowa Environmental Council. They will have a staff member there tomorrow. So sometimes it varies from, volunteers showing up or board members of some of the organizations to actual staff. But as I said earlier, your state employees usually have to take the day off and cannot be actively involved in lobbying most of the time. Your city staff, that could vary, because with the community, you can invite your city forester if you have one, or even an arborist that's doing contract work that is real supportive to attend your meeting with the mayor and some of the council members. That's it makes complete sense in a case like that if they're a supportive partner. Would Chuck, anything to add to that one, or Leslie, anything else popping up?
The only thing that I would add is I think Shannon's example is really outstanding of the coalition she put together in Iowa when you don't have a network of nonprofits the way California is fortunate to have, and nonprofits actually can carry a pretty good voice in California. But what it really impresses me about Shannon's coalition is the diversity, is that it's not just the nonprofit sector, and getting a landowner in there, and that's often an opportunity to connect with a member directly. And I would especially imagine in more of the rural states like Iowa, that's even more so true than in California. So the diversity of groups that she brought together, I think, is something that I definitely stress. We brought a group of diverse folks together from different nonprofit sectors, but she even went a step further and brought that diversity from a variety of practitioners that all connect back to the common theme.
Okay. Another question that kind of ties to that last one is something that Shannon mentioned. How do you find out when they have things like Capitol Day or Forestry Day or something like that at state legislature? And then in order to participate, do you have to have a table there, or can you just show up and walk through the halls and try to talk to some of your representatives as a local group?
Now, anyone can show up, and if your local group, but if you want to do an event, you have to register. Usually they're completely free, and plan ahead because they're in high demand. And so we plan ours about a year ahead and get a date nailed down, and we start promoting it through email and making phone calls to partners and trying to and have some organizing meetings. So you can start anywhere. If you guys have other organizations that are there, for example, if Audubon is there, or the Nature Conservancy, or there's a statewide coalition that you can tie into first, you could start there.
Yeah, this is Chuck. Events are great, and those kind of lobby days, as Shannon said, they are in high demand, a lot of interest. We'll participate in those. One of the things that we did last year was a reception, and we did it with our natural and working lands partners. and that was off-site, but walking distance, very important. If folks have to drive, at least in Sacramento, they're less likely to do it, but if they can walk from the Capitol over to the reception, we had a really good audience, and it was off-site advocacy, but it was off-site advocacy over drinks and hors d'oeuvres and some presentations and some photos that were out there were connecting natural resources back to GHG reductions. So again, something else that takes some planning. Great to have sponsors to cover some costs, but another effective way to get the message out.
That's a great example. We're actually doing breakfast tomorrow morning at 7:30. That's, for some reason, the legislators like to pop in on a breakfast so they can just grab a bite, you know, and say hi before they get buried upstairs with the day-to-day. So that's a great way to do it, and you know, it's very informal. So feel free to start at whatever level you're at, and we really appreciate, Leslie, the invitation. It's been great to work with you on this, Chuck, and you, Leslie, as well. Are we out of time? Are we?
We're right at noon. I didn't know if anybody else had any questions. I guess the one thing I would like for both of you to address real quick before we end the session is whether at the local level within your community or at the state level, how often should you reach out, and is there a good, better, best as far as time throughout the year to do it? And if you don't have a specific ask, is it just presenting, you know, this is what we accomplished? Is that going to grab their ear a little bit?
Yeah, I think it depends on your situation. I mean, you can use all sorts of examples. I prefer to at least know something about the budget. I mean, what was the budget in 1985? Has it gone up or down in your city, in your town? Have you made any progress? Where do you want to go? You know, get some specifics. You can use a specific tree. You know, you can put a sign on a tree with the dollars of benefits that tree is providing. Chuck, I don't know if you guys had some of those signs on your trees as people walked over to the reception.
That has some of those, they're very.
That has a real high impact. You know, they just have no clue that some of these large mature trees were providing thousands of dollars. And the best time, in my view, the best time to get a mayor or a city council person out or a state rep is at a planting, because they're being hands-on, they're having fun with you, they're getting to know you, and just making an effort to do more of that. But also those meetings, I think, at a city level should be once a year, no less than once a year.
Yeah, and this is Chuck, and first let me echo what Shannon said. Absolutely great to be on this webinar today. I hope folks took a lot from it. Thank you so much for the invitation from Leslie, and again, always great to work with Trees Forever. I would say that, you know, at the state level, especially during the budget process, if that's where your focal point is, it's okay to check in, you know, monthly, and, you know, especially if it's a year-round legislature. I know not all states have that. California does. And as far as, you know, you raised the question, Leslie, of is it okay to just check in versus ask for something? That's actually a split opinion. I think a lot of folks think that the only time that you don't really go to the legislature without an ask is when you're doing something like a meet and greet. But then you heard Shannon say that most of their time is advocacy through as an education tool. And we do that as well. I mean, it's not uncommon for me to go check in with a key staffer who's maybe the environmental consultant to our assembly speaker and just ask, how are things going with this special funding source that I talked about? Is urban forestry, you know, still part of the mix? And just get a feel of where your issue is, and that gives you a sense of, you know, are you on pretty comfortable ground, or do you need to work it a little bit more? So I think it really does vary from case to case, but I think it's okay to check in at a frequency that you're comfortable with, as long as you're not being viewed as a distraction or a nuisance.
Okay, great. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in, and we are at the end of our hour. So I want to thank everybody for attending. I will be emailing out an evaluation to everybody to just answer, I think it's 6 questions, just to gauge this presentation and to kind of get some suggestions for future webinars. So you'll be getting that later today. I want to make sure everybody, before you log off, you do get the handouts that Chuck and Shannon put together, and it's on that little 3-page paper in the top right. You can download those and have those for future reference. I want to make sure everybody had an opportunity to get that. And I will be, as I said, doing the survey in a few minutes. I want to bring up the fact we have one more webinar in our 2006 webinar series. It's on April 19th. It's about management plans and know what you need. So I hope you have a chance to register for that and attend that as well to get some more on-the-ground urban forestry management ideas on what role tree boards play in that and how to get your community forestry program up and running. So again, I appreciate everybody taking their time out of their day to listen. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thank you to Chuck and Shannon for all of your time that you put together, or you used to put together the presentation today.
Thank you,
guys, and hope to meet some of you at the National Urban Forestry Partners Conference in Indianapolis.
That's right, it is coming up. All right, so with that, everybody, you guys are free to go and enjoy the rest of your day and go educate and advocate for urban forestry in your community.
Rah, rah. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.